welcome back to season 2 of the 에리카쇼. 안녕하세요, 에리카쇼 season 2 시작돼서 너무 기쁩니다. 호스트 에리카입니다. 반갑습니다. I'm your host, Erica from CryptoSoul, and I talk to the main builders and, leaders in the blockchain space. And I am so thrilled to have our 41st guest, Tushar from Persistence. Welcome, Tushar. Hi.
Thank you, Erica. I would have loved to be the 42nd guest, given that 42 is the given that the answer to life is 42. But glad to be the 41st guest.
Yes, you're the first guest of season 2, which is very meaningful. And I've it's been a while since I've had an interview, so I'm very thrilled to have you with us. And let's go straight in. First of all, before many of you might not know who you are and what Persistence is, so can you give us a brief intro of who you are?
Absolutely. The co-founder and CEO of Persistence. Can talk about what my journey in the industry has been. Kind of similar to you, I started off hosting a podcast called Decrypt Asia,
Nice.
Where I would interview different kinds of stakeholders, entrepreneurs, fund managers, service providers to the industry. And that allowed me to build sort of a network in the industry, build a bit of a personal brand. It also gave me opportunities to start writing on platforms like Tech in Asia, which are the equivalent of TechCrunch in the West.
Yes.
And that very quickly, that gave me an opportunity to be the first employee at Lunex Ventures, which is the crypto arm of a traditional venture capital fund based out of Singapore called Golden Gate Ventures. So started off, doing different things at Lunex, including incorporating the fund, working with multiple service providers like tax advisors, fund administrators, auditors. Monetary Authority of Singapore is the local regulator to create Southeast Asia's first sort of dedicated and properly managed crypto fund, which is run by a traditional venture capital fund. And then was lucky enough to raise capital from institutional folks back in 2018, including a publicly listed Japanese company, the VC arm of a sovereign wealth fund, multiple family offices in Western Europe and Southeast Asia, and then deployed that capital into multiple startups, both on the equity side as well as on the token side. And then on the token side, both in the primary markets, which is before tokens get listed, but also wanted to give LPs exposure to things like Bitcoin, Ethereum. So the fund did phenomenally well. We had a sub $5,000 entry into Bitcoin, sub $100 entry into ETH. A lot of those positions are still riding. But from my perspective, I wanted to be more on the operator side of things as opposed to just a capital allocator. That's how Persistence came about. So I started going to a bunch of hackathons and events, and met Deepanshu, who's the CTO of Persistence. And, I was lucky enough to have Meher Roy, who's the co-founder of Chorus One, as a mentor of mine.
Yes.
And he was the one who had pointed me to, first of all, he was the one who had pushed me to do the podcast in the first place. He's a podcast host as well.
Yes.
He hosts Epicenter Bitcoin, as it used to be called, and now it's just called Epicenter. And he was the one who pointed me to a lot of POS protocols really early on as well. And then Deepanshu was digging into POS protocols as well. And so we, essentially did some evaluation and became early Cosmos community members. And so that's essentially the story of how Persistence came about. So Persistence itself is a Tendermint-based protocol, which is fueling different kinds of use cases. So both on the finance side as well as on the NFT side, although from our perspective, both fungible and non-fungible tokens ultimately they enable finance and what asset ownership means in the 21st century. So super privileged, to be part of a very hungry team. We're focused on use cases such as liquid staking, which is through our in-house application called pSTAKE. We're focused on interoperable NFTs, which is through our application Asset Mantle. Comdex is focused on synthetic commodities, which is through a third-party application, which uses the Persistence infrastructure. So our high-level thought process is very similar to that of Terra, where Terra is a tenement-based protocol. They have Chai as a third-party application. They have Anchor protocol, Mirror protocol as in-house applications. So it's very similar for us, where Persistence is a tenement-based protocol. We have Comdex as a third-party application, pSTAKE, Asset Mantle as in-house applications, and then we'll be fueling, other use cases as time progresses. But currently this is what the ecosystem looks like. What we also do to ensure that we stay at the absolute bleeding edge of the curve and understand and make sure our understanding of POS protocols stays up to date. We also run validator nodes through our validator entity, which is called Audit One. So that's essentially, what we're up to. Super excited about, proof of stake in general, super excited about the different kinds of use cases, super excited about Cosmos, and, happy to dig into all of those things as this interview progresses.
Wow. This was one of the most interesting background information I've ever heard. Because I didn't know you run a podcast, and also I didn't know you know Meher. So this is great. Now it kind of solves my next question, which was, how'd you get involved with Cosmos in the beginning? That was my next question, but then I totally understand where that came from. This is great. Oh my gosh. Wow. Thank you for the grand intro. It's very interesting. Wow. So that's kind of, okay. You just said that you were, interested in proof of stake, and, I think let's go step by step. Proof of stake is a very, elementary concept, but I think, many people still argue, it's going to argue forever, but I think why is it more fascinating? What makes it more, useful? And just, can you kind of share your story, your reasoning, I guess, behind this whole argument, debate?
Yeah, so I think more than proof of stake, what drew us to Cosmos was the application chain specific nature of what Cosmos stands for, and then the interoperability between these app chains. So essentially, at that particular time, so initially we were focused more at the protocol infrastructural level as opposed to focusing at the application level. So essentially what we were trying to do was trying to create infrastructure for commodity trading, which is the third-party application Comdex. And for that, what we wanted to do was essentially create KYC accounts, and what we wanted to do was have some sort of integration with the quote-unquote real world. And so from that perspective, the app chain model was super interesting for us. Now, obviously, the app chain model also, just by nature of how it's structured, automatically solves some of the problems around scalability, but it's also solves some of the problems around the user experience itself, where you may not necessarily need to have a wallet in terms of how a crypto wallet looks like today. You could have, especially for applications where at least some part of the app may be slightly centralized, you could have user interfaces where folks can, create username passwords instead of having a public-private key pair, and have the username password kind of be linked to the public-private key pair. So I think those are the things where, where we were operating over time. Obviously, I think we were a little bit ahead of the curve in terms of timing. And so right now we're focused on very heavy crypto native use cases. But sort of our longer term vision still remains that of, trying to get to, quote unquote mass adoption. But we're sort of going about it in a methodical way. So essentially, to answer your question, succinctly, it was the application chain philosophy of Cosmos that drew us to Cosmos. And then because we were part of the Cosmos ecosystem, we dug into, proof of stake and, delegated proof of stake, to be more precise. And so from my perspective, essentially what's happening in crypto is right now, a big part of what we're doing is just asset issuance, where we're issuing fungible tokens, whether they're, liquid staked coins or NFTs. And so we're, doing asset issuance of both fungible tokens and non-fungible tokens. Or, the next step is creating sufficient liquidity for these assets through DEXs. The next step is ensuring you can borrow and lend against these assets. And, obviously that gets very complicated for some users. So the final frontier is sort of ensuring that you could have end users through very simple interfaces get exposure to a bunch of fungible tokens, non-fungible tokens through indexes or through vaults where they're just putting in their stable coins and earning yields. Essentially that's what the end user, especially a non-savvy retail kind of user, wants to do. Someone who doesn't have time to really look after their finances. So high level, that's what we're doing right now. We're still sort of at the first stage or the second stage where we're creating liquidity for some of the asset issuances, that we're doing. But this is kind of high level what the story was in terms of how we came into Cosmos. Also, I think a lot of people forget, but Cosmos after Tezos was the second delegated proof of stake chain in production. Today, whether it's Solana, Near, Avalanche, they follow or take inspiration from some variation of how Cosmos Hub hit mainnet in terms of having incentivized testnets and things like that. So that methodology and that process is being followed by every other chain, and the Persistence team has been involved in the launch of a lot of these networks. So from our perspective, we just entered the game early and have been sort of early Cosmos community members from the super initial days.
Very interesting. Speaking of Cosmos, just a side question, but many things have changed. I think the ecosystem has progressed so much, and recently, there was the Cosmos Community Conference and so forth. But what's your opinion? What's your take or insight on the progression or the development of the Cosmos ecosystem? Like, what do you see? Like, because you've been seeing like from the early days. So I just want to see how you view the ecosystem growing.
Yeah, so I think there's pros and cons to being part of the Cosmos ecosystem. I think.
Okay.
I think so. I think, or just building in Cosmos. I think one of the good things is that there's not. Well, this could be a good thing or a bad thing. There's not too much quote unquote hype around Cosmos. So unlike. So something like, Solana or Avalanche, you have, huge backers, and a lot of these backers are, massively supporting these chains. They're supporting development. But what that leads to is a lot of sort of opportunists jumping in, who obviously, when the market is good and, things are going great, sort of jump in, try to make money. Essentially a lot of folks are opportunists. But, when, times become tough, they're the first ones to sort of, go away as well. The good thing about Cosmos is that, because you have to bootstrap your own validator set, you have to, ensure that you have integration with something like a Kepler, you have integration with different block explorers like, Cosmos Station or Big Dipper. It's not easy. And so you sort of attract the true believers and the true enthusiasts because it's not easy, and because there is no hype. So what happens is that the overall ecosystem becomes more resilient. So instead of having a big sort of peak and then like a big sort of pullback, you sort of steadily sort of keep growing slowly, which is something that we want to do as well. And so I think that is the fundamental difference between say the Cosmos ecosystem as opposed to some of the other ecosystems. So it's from a longer term perspective, it is more anti-fragile.
Yep.
But from a shorter term perspective, it's there can be some trade-offs.
Love people. Yeah, for sure. Thanks so much for. I mean, I was curious. You want to keep going? Yeah, please do.
Yeah, but from a technological perspective, I think things keep getting shipped. Obviously now the Interchain Foundation itself, or the Tendermint team itself, has so many entities that things are not very well organized, and so I think some of the other foundations, like the Web3 Foundation for the Polkadot Kusama ecosystem, or the Solana Foundation, they are a lot better organized and have much stronger BD. And so again, I think that is somewhat of a con, but again, the pro is that it sort of attracts the true believers, and so because folks. So we've seen now multiple sort of again, some of the listeners obviously may be aware, but some of the listeners may not. But now you have multiple sort of on a say fully diluted basis, $1 billion+ chains on which we use Tendermint as the consensus engine. So you have projects like Band Protocol, Injective Protocol, Terra, BSC, Persistence, Crypto.com.
Oh,
so
right.
You have so many, and obviously you have a whole lot of other Osmosis, Umi. I can name a lot that are worth, or are soon going to be worth north of $1 billion. So I think it's a very sort of underrated ecosystem, but I think a lot of builders have sort of quietly been building different kinds of applications, different kinds of use cases in the Cosmos ecosystem. So on a longer term horizon, I'm super bullish on the ecosystem growing.
Yeah, I agree. I think people find it surprising to see that a lot of big projects are building on Cosmos. I've seen many surprise faces. So, and in fact, there are many Korean teams that have switched to building on the Cosmos SDK. So which is a good sign. So it's been very interesting to see that trend as well. And it's been very like quiet too, but slowly but surely they're like moving, which is interesting and fascinating. Okay, well, I mean, recently pSTAKE has been getting a lot of attention, and recently announced a 10 million strategic funding raise for pSTAKE, which is huge. Congrats to the whole team. But yeah, can you explain what pSTAKE is about in specific, and why is liquid staking important in the ecosystem? I think you mentioned it a little bit, but can you explain a little bit more on why it's important?
Yeah, so I mean, I think, before going into what liquid staking is, kind of just talking about how we stumbled into liquid staking as well. So, in terms of, I think I've kind of high level talked about the journey that the team has had as well, in terms of just being part of, the wider sort of proof of stake ecosystem. So, if we back up a little bit, so Persistence came out of stealth in Q1 2020, and so that's almost 2 years ago. And when we came out of stealth, it was not the best of markets, and obviously in March 2020 we had this massive crash as the news of COVID broke out, and people sort of realized how bad COVID was. So it was really difficult to raise capital back then. And so that's when our entity Audit One was born as well, because we didn't have sufficient capital to essentially pay salaries. So what we started doing was we started running validated nodes on multiple other POS chains, and so used the staking rewards to essentially pay salaries. So that was sort of what we did to survive. Obviously, Persistence was able to fundraise in Q3, when the Q3 2020, when Q2, Q3 2020, when DeFi summer sort of 1.0 began. And then in Q4 2020, once we had raised capital, what we wanted to do was build a brand for Persistence. So as part of building a brand, we did a stake drop campaign where stakers of certain assets, including Atom, Luna, would receive a very targeted airdrop of the Persistence coin. And within a 3-month period, we had more than $1 billion worth of staked assets that were participating in this stake drop campaign. So that kind of gave us an idea that, there are so many end users who want to generate additional returns from already staked assets. So that was the genesis of pSTAKE. So essentially, we were building Persistence at the protocol level to facilitate other applications. But over time, during that period, I saw that a lot of entrepreneurs were moving up the value chain to the application level themselves. And so we had this idea that why just operate at the protocol level? We're going to, internally move up the value chain and create applications as well. It's similar to what Do Kwon did as well, where initially, Terra was supposed to be the protocol for chai, and that's it. And then over time, he got these ideas that, you can create Anchor protocol, Mirror protocol, and other use cases. So very similar thought process and journey. Do Kwon was also the absolute second investor into Persistence, in the depths of the bear market. And so that's our, connection with Korea as well. So essentially, that's how, pSTAKE came about. And when we started building pSTAKE, there was literally nothing else in the Cosmos ecosystem. So what we decided was that the STK Atom that we will issue. So essentially, what is pSTAKE? Today, if you have Atom, you stake them, you earn 10% APY, and you're happy. But you cannot do anything else with your atoms. So what we do is, if you stake atoms via the pSTAKE platform, not only do you make the APY on staking rewards, what the platform will do is issue you another representative coin called STK Atom, which can then be used for different things within the DeFi ecosystem, whether that is supplying liquidity to a DEX or using it as collateral for borrowing lending. So if you use Osmosis today, if you're supplying liquidity to, say, the Atom XPRT pool, you have to decide whether you want to stake your Atom or you want to supply liquidity to Osmosis. But what if you could do both? And so essentially, that's what we're trying to do. And that's why, liquid staking is going to be super interesting as well. Because, recently, if you see, Zcash themselves announced that they're going to move to POS. So it's clear that the world is essentially moving towards proof of stake. We have one big category winner for proof of work, which is obviously Bitcoin. And then everything else is moving to some variation of proof of stake. So you're going to be having billions or trillions of dollars locked up with validator nodes. And so these assets, even though they're producing staking rewards, are going to become non-productive. And what we want to do is make sure that these assets, continue to remain, being productive. And essentially, that's what we're trying to do, with pSTAKE. And so it's, essentially built on the back of our experience of running validator nodes, of having helped in the launch of the Cosmos Hub and other POS protocols, of having launched Persistence, which is our own POS protocol, having done the stake drop campaign. That's like all of these things essentially led to us, creating pSTAKE. So it's been sort of a meandering journey where we didn't start off saying that we're going to create liquid staking, but we just stumbled upon a use case that we thought would have a huge amount of usage and huge amount of appetite from the users. So, and then obviously, Persistence is very well capitalized now, thankfully, as opposed to 1.5 years ago. But what we wanted to do was we wanted to work with the absolute creme de la creme investors from around the world. And that's why we decided to do a strategic fundraise, even though we didn't need capital, to ensure that, Persistence can sort of reach the next level of success. And that's kind of what, the team and I have been working together on to see, we've done decently well. How do we 10x from here? Where does the next phase of growth come from? So we were lucky enough to onboard some really good investors. So we had a very diverse group of investors, including Sequoia, Galaxy, Three Arrows, Defiance, a bunch of validators, including Stakefish, Chorus One, Everstake, Figment, Cosmos Station, a bunch of leading angels, including Doke One again, Tasha from Alpha Finance, other angels from Aave and a few other folks from who used to work in different VC funds. So now essentially we've got some of the best validators in the world backing us. We've got some of the best investors in the world backing us, and essentially that gives us a great platform to fuel the next level of growth for Persistence and its ecosystem.
Wow, what a story. Yeah, this is amazing. I mean, to be honest, like I've seen you guys like always being very persistent and in a good way, and also very very consistent with your work. And I think the beauty of the DeFi space and also the NFT space as well. I mean, I think crypto as a whole, but DeFi in specific, I think they grow with flexibility. And I think like with demand, like public demand, or like I think it's really reflected in the building of a new platform or additional platform or something. So I think your growth has really symbolized that, really reflected that beauty advantage, I guess. So that's really great. And same with Terra, of course, but like I think you guys really progress into an ecosystem by building different elements to make it into a whole picture, which is very helpful to the ecosystem. So yeah, I mean, again, congratulations. This is like, I think with the backing, I think it's not about like the funding itself, but it's about this, the supporting role in general. That's really been going to be helpful for your team. You said about like, how the raise is going to be helping your team grow in the future, but do you have any specific plans on like, in the near future, how you're going to use the fund to kind of like focus on certain other elements that, need some more support or development on your end?
Yeah, so I mean, I think in terms of usage of funds, I think the two biggest sort of verticals that almost take away all of the resources. One is talent. The second is security audits. So I think those two things just suck up all the resources. I think those are the biggest expenses in terms of running a crypto startup. Obviously, there's this massive war on talent that is going on with so much funding, and then once you are able to develop code, you cannot, given the nature of the industry, you cannot afford to have bugs in the code, and so then the security auditors are fully backed up as well and don't have availability. So those are the two places where you really have to spend a lot of money, energy, resources to ensure. Rest of the things kind of, figure themselves out. But I think this is where most of the capital goes. In terms of what's next for us, so, high level on pSTAKE itself, what we're working on. So right now, like I said, because when we started building pSTAKE, there was nothing in the Cosmos ecosystem. So the STK Atom and STK XPRT that we issue right now is not issued on the Persistence chain. We issue them on Ethereum as ERC20 assets for now. And that's because we wanted to make sure that we capitalize on the composability and the liquidity that Ethereum DeFi offers. Now that we have Osmosis, now that there's Umi launching as a borrowing lending platform, now what we're working on is native liquid staking, where STK Atom, STK XPRT is going to be issued on the Persistence chain itself, which is an IBC enabled chain, and hence can allow flow of assets to Osmosis, Umi, and other applications in the Cosmos ecosystem. In parallel, what we're doing is, and again, from the beginning, we've been sort of we've not been, Bitcoin maximalists or Ethereum maximalists or Atom maximalists. We're sort of interoperability maximalists. So we think that multiple assets are going to exist on multiple chains, and there's going to be bridges across these chains. And so in that respect, what we're also doing is working on liquid staking for non-Tendermint based assets, non-Cosmos assets as well. So ETH2, Solana are some of the other assets that we've been focused on as far as liquid staking goes. And that also kind of helps us in terms of fueling, the next stages of growth for pSTAKE as an application. So essentially what we have is, from an asset issuance perspective, we have native liquid staking for asset issuance and persistence. We have, ETH, Solana. Outside of this, what we're doing is how do you create use? So once you have issued an STK asset, whether that's STK XPRT or STK Atom or STK Sol, STK ETH, what do you do with that asset? So the next step is creating liquidity for these assets. The step after that is ensure that you can borrow, lend against these assets. And then finally, you can get to a point where you can have like an index kind of strategy where you have like a POS index of sorts so that people don't have to buy Atom and XPRT and DART and Kusama and Sol. They can just buy an index and you keep earning staking rewards in the background and essentially bet on the overall POS, ecosystem to grow over a period of time. So that's kind of what's in the works. So right now we have liquidity on Sushi. Once native liquid staking goes live, we'll bootstrap liquidity on Osmosis. Right now we're working on some integrations for permissionless borrowing lending on the Ethereum side. And then once UMI or other borrowing lending platforms get launched in the Cosmos ecosystem, we'll be working on borrowing lending there. But yeah, so essentially asset issuance for various assets plus DeFi integrations. Those are the two biggest things that are keeping us busy from a development perspective on pSTAKE.
Oh, very exciting. Thank you. This is very clear to me. Like, wow. Thanks so much for putting that into like easy explanations. But when you were saying in the previous part, you mentioned a very important point about, I just wanted to kind of point that out, but human talent. I actually recently hosted a Crypto Lisbon meetup in Lisbon, and the panelists all agreed on that, in 2022, the biggest issue will be, the proof of talent and getting the right talent. That was the main issue. And so as you mentioned this in this interview, I was like, okay, this is definitely one of the most challenging points that all projects are going to face. So this is a very important point that I really wanted to point out. And I think for you, having this, more, like, I guess, more flexibility and funding, you can definitely have some more talent, maybe in Korea or maybe in other regions. I mean, your team is mostly based in India right now, or how's the team like, dispersed right now?
So mostly India, but now we've started hiring internationally as well, especially on the business development side. Again, from our perspective, we want to be a global project. And so while, the majority of the team is Indian, so we've started onboarding folks in Singapore, some folks in Portugal to drive BD efforts. So over a longer term perspective, our goal is to be as global as possible. Again, the great thing with crypto is that you can be as borderless as possible. And so we're creating products for the world, but sometimes that requires dedicated sort of BD efforts in certain geographies.
Absolutely. I mean, pSTAKE is definitely getting a lot of attention. But you mentioned about Comdex as well. I know that you've been building like on other products very consistently as well. What are some of the recent developments on your other products or projects that you want to share with us? Because I think your team is a massive powerhouse. It just keeps like building and building. So I think honestly it's hard to follow up because there's too much development, but in a good way. Would you like to kind of highlight some of the main developments recently, some of the exciting things that are happening, maybe in beginning of 2022? Anything you want to share in milestones?
So so again, high level speaking, if I break it down, so we've got the persistence protocol, which is infrastructural in nature. And then we have pSTAKE Asset Mantle. pSTAKE being liquid staking, Asset Mantle being NFTs, and then Comdex being a third-party application focused on synthetic commodities, and then Audit being sort of this sort of validator as a service kind of entity. And so from that perspective, I think big developments. So Asset Mantle recently launched its testnet. So that is going to go live in Q1 for sure. Native liquid staking is going to go live in Q1 on the pSTAKE side. Comdex mainnet is happening this week. It just happened, I think, and on the audit front, we continue to expand the coverage for multiple sort of POS chains. So I mean, things are sort of going in full gear. What I kind of we have independent teams working on these independent sort of projects as well. Obviously, there's some cross collaboration on the research side, cross collaboration on the design side, cross collaboration on marketing. So there are certain functions that are across products, and then for a lot of products, we have independent product teams. So that's kind of high level how we're structured. From our perspective, we'll continue to deliver, as many products as possible, try to work with as many teams. Over time, what we want to do is work with third-party developers as well. Right now, a lot of the development is happening in-house, but over time, we want to make sure that, we sort of bring third-party folks and, create platforms for them to build interesting solutions as well. But yeah, I think for over the next 3 to 6 months, I think that's sort of, our biggest focus, that we ensure that the applications that we're creating have great product market fit. Instead of having 30, 40 applications, I think the best is to have a couple of applications that have, power users, and then kind of grow from that and, build from that.
Absolutely. Thanks for sharing. I mean, recently, I think the NFT boom I think every project is trying to focus at least some elements on NFT because, as you probably know, it's kind of hyping as much as it can. I think it's exploding, especially in Korea as well. What are your thoughts on it? And, maybe some of your personal insights on the NFT boom, but also like what is Persistence trying to maybe incorporate that trend? And because you're such a flexible and that's in a good sense, I think, you guys are definitely trying to have that NFT, plus element in your product. So can you explain further and like maybe add some real insights as well? That'd be really great.
Yeah, absolutely. So, if we talk about the current standard for NFTs, most famous one being ERC-721, essentially, if we talk about what are NFTs, NFTs is just a way to represent data. Ultimately, ERC-721 is pretty restrictive in terms of the kind of metadata that you can capture. What we're trying to do is, with Asset Mantle, essentially at the protocol level, we have this thing called inter-NFT, where what we're trying to do is create natively interoperable NFTs, and also have metadata that is more expansive than what exists today. So the current metadata might be, sufficient to, represent, images and things like that. So represent, say punks or CryptoKitties and things like that. But over a period of time, as the NFTs themselves get more complex, you don't want to be limited by the kind of metadata that you want to capture. You also don't want to confuse the, people minting NFTs with too much metadata. So, strike a fine balance. So what we're trying to do is, essentially have NFTs that can capture a whole bunch of use cases outside of what we currently see today at the protocol level. Obviously, at the application level, what we're trying to do is create what we call a Shopify of NFTs, where OpenSea is kind of like Amazon, where anyone can come and sell their goods. But what Shopify allows you to do is spin up your own marketplace, like a customizable marketplace. And so essentially that's what we're trying to do, where we're giving, folks almost like a no-code way to create your own marketplace. So, say you're very passionate about collecting coins or collecting stamps, and you have these NFT representation of multiple stamps. You can create your own marketplace, and essentially Asset Mantle becomes like a marketplace of marketplaces where you have, say, a bunch of Pokemons, a bunch of stamps, a bunch of coins, a bunch of other things, each with its own sort of interface, because you can customize interfaces. So high level, that's what we're trying to do at the application level. At the protocol level, just making sure that NFTs are interoperable and have different kinds of metadata that can be captured.
I remember in Hackathon HCMC, the hackathon that I organized, there was a talk about intro NFTs, which was great. So I remember, and yeah, I wanted to follow up on the recent developments, but thanks for sharing that as well. Yeah, I think the Korean, so right now we're, of course, doing English, but I think, I'm based in Korea, so a lot of my audience are based in Korea. So I just wanted to, get your thoughts on, maybe the Korean market, because I think, as you talked about mass adoption, I think, and also the global aspect of crypto, you do have to take into account many areas in the world. And I think Asia is definitely underrepresented, especially due to COVID. But what are your thoughts on like the current state of, I guess, Asia in general, or maybe like, do you have an interest in Korean markets, or do you have any plans in Korea that you want to kind of share with us? That'd be really great.
Yeah. So, I think Korea, since I've gotten into crypto, I think, Korea has been super interesting. Obviously I was, based out of Singapore when I got into crypto, and obviously, I think the whole world knows about the kimchi premium
Yes.
that exists in Korea. But I think outside of that, I think it's a super interesting community. So I've spent some time, with the Nonce folks, and I've stayed at Nonce
nice.
as well. And so, Si-Yoon and Young-Hoon were the founders of Nonce, great friends as well.
Nice.
We have, 3-4 big validators from Korea. So DSRV, Cosmos Station, Stakefish, and Bee Harvest. So we have 4 big validators from Korea. Obviously, Terra and Do Kwon have been investors into both Persistence, pSTAKEE. So I have a lot of touch points. I've been for Deconomy in the past.
Nice.
So and in general, sort of big fan of Seoul. I've not visited other parts of Korea. So I think from those perspectives, I think we're already doing a lot of things. With multiple stakeholders in Korea, and definitely a huge fan of what the Nonce folks have done in terms of sort of creating this co-working, co-living space focused on crypto. Again, from our perspective, definitely want to be super active. I think right now we're just in this phase where a lot of development activity is taking place, and obviously the team has scaled up, and so we're trying to get organized from a bunch of perspectives. Over time, we've always tried to focus on the non-English speaking regions as well, whether that is Vietnam, which is super important for us, Thailand, Korea, of course, China, but obviously China, I think over time, because of the regulatory stance taken, I think its importance is sort of going down. But from our perspective, Latin America is sort of going up. So from our perspective, we want to be as widely known as possible, and have communities in different parts of the world. Korea being sort of a very strategic location.
Yeah, you have many touch points in Korea, so you have to come down here. But yeah, next year should be interesting. But yeah, I'll keep you updated on my plans. But yeah, thanks for sharing your love for Korea. And as you mentioned, you're based in India right now. But because I think a lot of many people are very curious about the scene in India as well, the crypto scene, the regulations front. Just wanted to get your general quick take on what the current status is, and as you mentioned, it's maybe easier to do business abroad. But yeah, can you kind of brief us on what the current status is, and what your point of view is on the Indian crypto scene?
Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, high level, super bullish on India. I think even if you look at the non-crypto startup world in India, after the US and China, has the third largest number of unicorns. I think, I don't remember the exact number, but I think it's 75 plus unicorns in total so far from India. Wow. And I think about half of them were this year. Will create. And
during
so,
COVID. Wow.
Okay, yeah, and so I think and obviously multiple IPOs happening. Whether that is Zomato, Paytm, Nykaa, these all massive Indian startups. So I think from that perspective, overall, I've been super bullish on technology as a whole, super bullish on India as a whole, super bullish on crypto. I think those are the three. I'm long India, long crypto, long technology. So obviously from a talent perspective as well, I think there's a lot of ambition and passion, entrepreneurship in general in India. So overall, super bullish. Obviously from a regulatory perspective, still there's a little bit of uncertainty, but from my perspective, I remain very bullish overall, at least on Indian entrepreneurs.
I think same with Korea. But also, 75 unicorn, that's crazy. Wow. But yeah, I highly want to, strongly want to visit India at some point, because I think the development scene is really, the builder scene is massive. And I think a lot of projects select India as the top, builder location for hackathons. And yeah, so which is amazing. Last question. We've talked a lot, but what's your vision on a personal level, and also, in terms of Persistence as a whole, which I'd like to share with us? I mean, personal level, I think that could be different, or that could be similar, but just, last question.
No, absolutely. So I think for Persistence, it's very straightforward. I think, at least from my perspective, it's very clear what we need to do over the next 10 years or so. Like I said, I think essentially what the internet did for media and information is what crypto is doing for finance. And from that perspective, ultimately across centuries, finance has not changed, right? You're not going to fundamentally change borrowing, lending, or you're not going to change asset exchange. So ultimately finance remains the same. You can obviously have redefine what it means to own assets in the 21st century. So I think from that perspective, working on different sort of money Legos, as they're called, whether that is asset issuance, DEXs, borrowing, lending, indexes, options, insurance. I think those are sort of the few, tools within finance. And ultimately you want to get to a point where you have nice, clean interfaces for sort of mass adoption. No one cares about, whether they're going to be doing liquid staking, right? So all you want to do is make sure that you're being able to generate good yield ultimately. And so provide a nice interface for both from a DeFi and CeFi perspective, right? Like not everyone is going to have a wallet, but if you could just link up to your bank account, and if you have US dollars in your bank account that can earn greater yield, then that becomes, super interesting for the end user, because obviously, maybe 95 or 90% of people in the world don't actually care about, they just want to make yield to be able to pay off things. Mm-hmm. So I think that's kind of, and that is sort of, I think, even in 2025, we're going to be working on a lot of the same things that we're talking about today. I think development just takes longer than a lot of use cases that we see today or are talking about today, were being discussed in, 2016, 17, 18 as well, or even in 2013, 14, 15. Fundamentally, I think that's, where persistence goes. I think from personal perspective, like I said, I'm long on a few things, whether that's crypto, technology in India. And so from a personal perspective, always want to be at the bleeding edge of innovation, or work with deep tech, work in the deep tech field. And so I think over time, I think we're already kind of seeing that, where, now with, this massive narrative on the metaverse, you have AR and VR kind of meeting crypto. Mm-hmm. And so over time, I think what's going to happen is all of the, deep tech fields are going to sort of merge together, instead of operating in silo. Yeah. And so to find that next phase of, growth, you will need to have people who have at least a high level understanding of what's happening in the AR, VR world, what's happening in gaming, what's happening in finance, what's happening in crypto, and then try to see how to merge everything. And so I think over a period of time, my goal is to try and automate a lot of things at Persistence, put a lot of processes in place, have a lot of folks who can take care of the day-to-day stuff, so that, which is what I'm trying to do these days, so that I can spend more time, thinking and strategizing and, playing with these new technologies, as opposed to being buried in back-to-back meetings and sending emails or on Telegram. So that's kind of high level how I see my role evolving.
Oh, wow. Thank you so much. This was a great, session to get to know you better, and also about Persistence. It gave me a much more clear picture on like what you guys are doing, what you guys are aiming for. So thank you so much for your precious time. And, I look forward to seeing you in person in Seoul, in 2022.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Erica, for the time and for those insightful questions as well, and your patience to listen to all the answers.
Of course. Thank you so much. Thank you.